Thursday, the last day of September here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 4 Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And Jared, we've got Jacksonville at Cincinnati tonight. I know they want to market it as a battle of number one picks, but I'm not sure battle is the word I would use for this game.
Yeah, I enjoy all these football games, especially when we got what should be a big spot for Joe Mixon. So I think that's what we're rooting for tonight.
That's right. I already put some money on Joe Mixon in the underdog weekly stuff. So we'll see where things go. The Bengals are 7.5-point favorites at home in this one after clobbering Pittsburgh on the road last week. It's an over-under of 46. We'll start on the Jacksonville side where James Robinson has rebounded from a frightening level of usage in week 1. Looked better the past couple of weeks, 65% of the running back carries last week against Arizona. He's fourth on the team in targets so far, but tied for ninth among all running backs in the league. So it seems like things are going better for James Robinson now than we might have feared coming out of week 1.
He's also playing well. He's second in PFF rushing grade among 60 qualifying running backs. He's seventh among those 60 in elusive rating. That passing game usage you mentioned is nice since Jacksonville is so bad. They're playing from behind so often. Cincinnati's defense has been better than expected so far. I mean, they've opened with Minnesota, then Chicago, and Pittsburgh. So, two pretty easy matchups on the defensive side. But it'll be interesting to kind of track, whether this Bengals defense is at least mediocre this season. I think it might be.
That's right. I mean, we've got them way up the DVOA rankings on Football Outsiders. I think I believe that they're better than they have been the past couple of years. I'm not ready to believe that it's a matchup that you worry about. So I would say my reaction to what we've seen so far is don't say, ooh, the Bengals, everybody's going to go off. But also don't say, uh-oh, look what the Bengals just did to Pittsburgh.
I mean, what's helping them too, and we'll get into this when we talk about the Bengals offense, but they're just playing so slow and they're playing so run heavy. I think that, that's limiting the chances for the opposing offense.
Mm-hmm. Still on the Jacksonville side, Marvin Jones, 9, 11, and 8 targets so far, 24% target share through 3 games, leads the team there. He's 6 total targets ahead of number 2, DJ Chark, 7 ahead of Laviska Shenault. I think Marvin Jones is easily the top play among the 3. They're all kind of in play at some level, but it's Marvin Jones, and I can't say I'm overly interested in Chark and Shenault.
Yeah, Jones is like the only thing working in this passing game so far. I'd feel good using Marvin Jones as like a wide receiver 3. I would try not to use DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault. Chark saw 12 targets in the opener. He has just 10 in the 2 games since. So even his total targets I think are a bit inflated. And then Shenault, I mean, just the way they're using him, he has a 5-yard average depth of target. Like it's just tough to produce in fantasy when your chances are coming that close to the line of scrimmage.
And especially when your offense isn't playing very well, including that quarterback. It's a matchup that's better for all of the receivers because the Bengals are without safety Jesse Bates. They're without corner Chidobe Awuzie. I think that leaves some upside for Trevor Lawrence, but there's just too much else at quarterback right now for me to rely on a rookie on the road who's just not playing well in general.
Yeah, like I keep waiting for Lawrence to get it going. So I still believe in the talent. So I would not be surprised if he comes out and has a pretty nice game in this spot. But I think he should only be in play in 2 quarterback leagues.
Yeah, I think he could do anything from 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks in this game to like 190, 1 touchdown, 3 picks.
Exactly.
We do have a question specifically on Trevor Lawrence, though. Travis Zuschlag from Facebook, Superflex, wants to know whether he should play Trevor Lawrence or Mike Williams at the Superflex spot. That's a tough one.
That is tough. I actually look at our projections. I mean, it's almost always the quarterback in those situations. Now, I can't imagine Mike Williams isn't one of your top 3 wide receivers at this point. But I mean, I guess if it's between those 2, I'd go Lawrence though, just because the quarterbacks give you such a higher floor, just because they're going to get they're going to drop back 35, 40 times.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that Mike Williams isn't one of the top 2 wide receivers in this lineup. So I agree. If you really have to come down to deciding between those 2 guys at Superflex, I think you have to lean Lawrence just because of that floor. Because, I mean, Mike Williams could have a good game and just see 5 targets and not give you anything. That just happens at wide receiver, even when you're playing well. But Trevor Lawrence is always going to get the ball. So I would lean slightly that way. I sure wouldn't feel good about it. And I would hope that Mike Williams can actually find the way into the lineup anyway. On the Cincinnati side of this one, Jamar Chase has scored plenty of points so far. I believe he just won Offensive Rookie of the Month or whatever it is that they handed out. He's just 42nd in our expected fantasy points metric so far. He's near Allen Robinson in that range. And I think the big key to remember with Jamar Chase here is that he's propped up by touchdowns. 4 of those so far. That's pushing him to 11th in PPR points at the position. He's tied for 56th in targets, tied for 47th in catches, but tied for 18th in yards and tied for 2nd in touchdowns.
Yeah, he can't keep up this pace if the usage remains. Now, again, the problem for this whole Bengals offense really is just they're 32nd in situation neutral pass rate. They're 31st in situation neutral pace. So it's just a slow run heavy offense right now. So that's the problem. Jamar Chase has a 21% target share. That's a fine number, but they're just not throwing it enough. T. Higgins is out again tonight, so that helps Chase and Tyler Boyd. Chase, again, he's not going to keep up this pace, but I think, especially in this matchup, I think Chase is a wide receiver 2 and Tyler Boyd's like a wide receiver 3 tonight.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to play Jamar Chase tonight. I think you also consider him a potential sell high candidate at this point, especially with his numbers helped the past 2 weeks by T. Higgins being out. Tyler Boyd, I agree, is also a fairly easy start this week. 25% target share for him on the season. He leads Cincinnati in that category. By the way, Jamar Chase is only 1 target, 1 catch ahead of T. Higgins, despite playing 1 more game than Higgins so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, Joe Burrow is playing well. So, like, I think Cincinnati's they're not going to be this run heavy all season. Like, I think they're easing Burrow in. These early games, they've had a chance to kind of run it, especially last week, playing with the lead most of that game against Pittsburgh. So I do think this is going to turn around. But until it does, Burrow sits outside our top 12 quarterbacks despite the matchup this week, just because you can't project him for a ton of passing volume.
Yeah, I agree with that. 2+ touchdown passes in each game so far, but he's just quarterback 21 in fantasy points, 9 total rushing yards, and 3 of his 5 rushing attempts last week against Pittsburgh were kneel down. So he's not even trying to run the ball really so far. Joe Mixon, you mentioned, delivered big time in week 1. Seems like a good spot. He played the workhorse role at the beginning of the year that we were hoping he would play. Hasn't looked quite so much like that since then, especially last week, though.
I mean, the targets haven't been there. And again, it's a lot of it's because there just hasn't been passing volume in Cincinnati in general. Mixon sitting on a 9% target share. You'd like to see that higher as well. He is losing some passing down snaps to both P. Ryan and Chris Evans. It's still, Mixon's backfield. The rushing volume's there. He's 2nd in the NFL with 67 carries behind only Derrick Henry. And again, in this spot with the Bengals 7-point home favorites, like Mixon's a good bet to get 20 carries tonight.
Yeah, and I would like to believe that some elevation in pass routes for Chris Evans and Samaje Perine last week came because it was a lopsided victory for Cincinnati. But, we'll see where that goes going forward. Not worried at this point, but something worth watching. By the way, Travis says that he's got Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, and Robert Woods at wide receiver. I would definitely be playing Mike Williams over Robert Woods at this point.
Yes, for sure.
New York Giants at the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are 7.5-point favorites, and that's down 2 from where it opened. Both of those points have been shaved off of the Saints implied total. The over-under is at 41, which is down 2.5 points from open. It's the lowest total for the week by 0.5 point ahead of Lions Bears. The Giants have the 2nd lowest implied team total for the week, and they're closer to last place Houston than they are to 3rd to last Jets. I think that tells a lot of the story for the Giants side in this one, and they're going to be missing most likely Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton from this game too.
Yeah, so definitely time to hop off Daniel Jones as like a 1 quarterback spot there. He's been good so far, but tough matchup here, and missing 2 of his top 3 wide receivers. Kenny Galladay is the guy who, he should get a volume boost with Shepard and Slayton out. Galladay's snaps were scaled back a bit last week, and their wide receiver coach talked about that. He basically said, Galladay's still not in game shape after missing all that time in the summer. So that'll be worth watching. It seems like they almost have to play him in a full-time role with those wide receiver injuries, but tough spot for the offense in general. So for me, Galladay is just a wide receiver 3, even with those other wide receiver injuries.
Yeah, I agree with all that. The Saints 3rd in overall defensive DVOA, according to Football Outsiders so far, 6th against the pass, 3rd against the run. So they're playing all of it pretty well. And the Giants aren't doing anything well enough to really combat that. Saquon Barkley is the other guy worth talking about. His usage has been good. That's really all I have to say for him at this point, though. He's propped up by the receiving, either if we're talking production or projection. But he's really only seen 1 worthwhile game of targets so far. I want to believe that last week showed us what we're going to get going forward as he gets further removed from the injury. But, I also kind of need more than one game before I can absolutely trust it.
I mean, yeah, you can't absolutely trust it yet, but I mean, I think we thought all along that, week 1 definitely limited. Week 2 on the short week, we kind of thought limited, and this is kind of when we thought he'd be unleashed, and he was unleashed. 86% of the snaps, 16 of the 19 running back carries, 7 targets. It was a 20% target share. And again, with Shepard and Slayton out, like I think you project Barkley for about 20% of the targets again. So tough matchup, tough spot for the offense, but volume alone, I think, makes Barkley a top 12 running back play this week.
Yeah, it doesn't feel awesome to play him right now, but I think the target volume you have to project for him, and that makes it a little bit comfier to start him in PPR. I do think I would play Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, and James Robinson over Saquon Barkley if I were making those decisions, though.
Chubb, I could see. I'm playing Barkley over the other two, just for the volume.
You mentioned Kenny Galladay. I think there's also a potential target boost for Evan Engram in this one. He wasn't quite back to his normal playing time in week 3, but did play 56% snap share, saw 6 targets. That was third on the team behind a tie for Saquon Barkley and Colin Johnson, who I'm not playing this week.
Right. I mean, the Giants' other receivers behind Galladay are going to be Colin Johnson, Kadarius Toney, CJ Board. Ingram's always a tough guy to trust. I think you can probably do better in like season-long lineups. But I do think he's interesting for a DFS at least. I'm sure he's cheap on most of the sites. And again, he should be one of the top 3 options in this passing game this week.
I mean, if we're comparing Evan Engram with like Dallas Goedert, I think that Evan Ingram's probably got a higher target ceiling this week.
Yeah. Oh, Ingram's usage is like already better than Goddard in his first game back.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have to get too far down the tight end rankings before it's like, shrug emoji.
Yep.
Anything else in that game? Well, we got the New Orleans side.
I mean,
because the Giants have me so uninterested, it makes the rest of the game disappear. That said, I'm not sure there's a whole lot worth talking about on the Saints side besides like Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, it's Kamara. I mean, this offense, super slow, super run heavy. I mean, Jameis Winston has 63 pass attempts through 3 games, so there's nothing to like in the passing game. Kamara, his passing game usage is a bit disappointing just because the volume as a team's been so low, but his rushing volume, he's topped 20 carries twice already this season. He had only done that 2 times in his entire career before this year. So, he's getting the best usage of his career so far.
Mm-hmm. And if somehow the targets started going toward Marquez Callaway, I think he has the ability to produce, but we haven't seen the targets there yet. So there's no reason to start believing that in week 4, especially when they're heavy favorites.
Yeah, no reason for the Saints to, throw it more than they have been in this game.
Kansas City at Philadelphia. The Chiefs are 7-point favorites, which is bold after they got beaten at home. But over under 53.5. It's the second highest total for the week. The Chiefs carry the second highest team total at 30.75 implied points. They're coming off scoring just 24 at home against the Chargers, but did put up a season high 437 yards in that one, turned it over 4 times. We're not going to see that most of the time. So I think all your Chiefs options here should be just fine.
Yeah, the usuals. I would look into selling McCole Hardman this week. I know, he just is coming off a decent game. He finished wide receiver 34 last week, but his route rates are actually declining. They went 84% in week 1, down to 76% in week 2, 60% last week. He's starting to lose more to Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle. And the Chiefs, of course, just added Josh Gordon. Who knows what he's going to end up doing, but it's another option at least. So it seems like the Chiefs are kind of like realizing again that, Hardman's better off in this like gadget role than as like the clear number 2 cut wide receiver. So not a guy I would trust in fantasy lineups. Again, if you have him, I'd be looking to, potentially sell high this week.
Yeah, I wouldn't be going shopping Hardman on his own because I don't think there are too many people that are strongly believing in Hardman, but he could look attractive as part of a trade package. Chiefs players are always attractive to fantasy owners. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a little bit easier to roll out for week 4 after he had a good week 3 as well.
He did. He produced. I mean, the usage wasn't a whole lot better. He still only saw, I believe it was 2 targets. Kind of capitalized on the good matchup against the Chargers. Another decent matchup here, I guess. I mean, Philly's run defense, I think, looks fine on paper, but, they're 22nd in Football Outsiders run D. They just got gashed by the Cowboys on Monday night. So it's a decent spot for Edwards-Helaire. I still think he's like a running back 2 that is going to give you some RB1 weeks just because of the how good the Chiefs offense is.
Yeah, at some point he's going to luck into touchdowns like Julio Jones.
Yep.
The Chiefs defense, by the way, has allowed 457, 481, and 352 total yards in 3 games, the 3rd most total yards allowed through 3 weeks, the second most points allowed, 31.7 per game. They've allowed more points and yards than they have produced so far. So it's a nice spot for the Philly offense coming off a disappointing outing at Dallas. Jalen Hurts has not been stellar in real life, but has been stellar for fantasy usage so far. 9th in total points, but one of the few QBs that has delivered starter level production every single week so far.
Right. His fantasy finishes have gone 5th, 10th, and 10th. And that's despite not playing well as a passer. It's the rushing. It's hard for him not to finish as a top 12 quarterback when you have the rushing production he does. The Chiefs already played Lamar Jackson, gave up 107 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to him. So, as you said, the Chiefs defense hasn't really been capable of stopping anything yet.
Yeah. I assume that we'll see a different game plan this week. The Eagles came out at Dallas like they thought that they were going to have to win a shootout. They were basically approaching it the way Dallas seemed to at Tampa Bay. The problem is Philly is not equipped to play that kind of football. They don't have the wide receivers that Dallas does. They don't have the quarterback that Dallas does. It did not work. So I would assume that they run the ball a little bit more early in this one against Kansas City. That should mean better usage for Miles Sanders. His week 3 usage was appalling, but it was not in line with what he got the first 2 weeks, which was better. It's certainly not somebody that you can depend on for fantasy production right now, but Miles Sanders should be okay, like middle low RB2 range.
Yeah, I'd expect them to kind of lean on him early in this game. It's a good matchup. The concern is, when Philly falls behind, they start getting Kenneth Gainwell on the field. So that's kind of the downside with Sanders. But again, the matchup's good. The Chiefs have allowed 5.0 yards per carry through running back so far.
Mm-hmm. The pass catchers otherwise, I think, are going to be flimsy. But for this game and beyond, we'll start with Devontae Smith because he does lead the team in targets, just 2 ahead of Jalen Reagor. But he's behind Reagor in receptions. He's caught just 52% of the passes thrown his way. And it's been more of a Jalen Hurts issue than it has been a Devontae Smith issue. He's added some yardage through pass interference calls that he's drawn on defenders. 0 drops so far through 3 games for the rookie. But here are Jalen Hurts's QB ratings on balls thrown toward Devontae Smith. In week 1, 148.5, which kind of set us all up to expect more than what we've gotten the past 2 weeks. Past 2 weeks, 39.6, 23.6. So Devontae Smith has upside, but he's a little tough to like right now.
He is to me, he's like a wide receiver 4 moving forward. I think you can upgrade him to like wide receiver 3 status this week because of the matchup. The Chiefs have already allowed 4 wide receivers to score 19 plus PPR points. And I do still think, Smith is the top wide receiver on this team. I know the targets have gotten closer, but I think he's the best target bet among the wide receivers going forward.
I definitely agree with that. The targets would look better if there hadn't been multiple plays negated by penalties so far. And he's had a few deep balls that were pretty close to hitting. So there's more to Devontae Smith than the other guys. It has been a solid start for Jalen Reagor, though, especially considering the negative buzz on him this summer. That said, what you're hoping for from him right now is 4 to 5 catches and like 40 to 50 yards. So it's not worth the downside risk to chase that in most cases.
Yeah, you definitely should be able to do better than Reagor. He's 40th among wide receivers in targets, 48th in air yards. So he's basically getting like wide receiver 4 type usage. And I think you probably bet on him being less efficient than average, just catching balls from Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm. It's a positive matchup for Eagles tight ends, but there's no split in roles for Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. They're cannibalizing each other's value. They've each seen 11 targets now through 3 games. And Monday night, it was 7 for Zach Ertz versus 4 for Dallas Goedert, even in a game where Jalen Hurts threw 39 passes. So, one might be fine this week. They both might be okay, but there's not a reason to really like either one, I don't think.
No, there's not. So Goedert is 22nd among tight ends in our expected fantasy points, and Zach Ertz is 28th. So they're getting like low end tight end 2 usage, both of them.
It's basically higher profile Austin Hooper and David Njoku.
Pretty much.
I don't want any part of either defense in this one. People probably aren't playing the Eagles against the Chiefs, but I have seen the Chiefs floated as a streaming option. When the defense is playing as poorly as Kansas City is right now, I'm not chasing the Jalen Hurts matchup because I think while there's a chance that the ball gets turned over and that there are some sacks, the Chiefs haven't been good on the sack front. There's also a chance that Philly scores, 25 to 30 points in this game.
Yeah, it's also a good streaming week. There's like 3 or 4 defenses I would much prefer over the Chiefs as a streamer.
Yes, I agree with that. And we'll hit on a few of those as we move through. Anything else from this game first, though?
Nope.
Houston at Buffalo, the Bills by 16.5, because apparently this one's a college game now. Over under 46.5. I mean, there's no surprise that Houston has the lowest implied total on the week. Bills are the highest at 31.25. The Texans side is easy. It's absolutely nothing but Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, I mean, I will say Davis Mills wasn't a disaster in his first start last Thursday night, which just helps Brandon Cooks. And Cooks has seen 43% of Davis Mills targets over the past 2 weeks, which honestly is like right around what he was seeing from Tyrod Taylor too. So, I mean, we know where the ball is going here. Tough matchup for Cooks. He's going to see a decent amount of Trey White, but like he's very likely going to get 10 plus targets again. So it makes him a pretty safe fantasy play.
Right. If you get 12 targets, you can catch 5 and still have a solid fantasy day.
Exactly.
On the Buffalo side, everything's in play. Even Emmanuel Sanders down at the number 3 spot at wide receiver for the Bills is averaging 6.7 targets per game so far.
Yeah, we talked about it last week. You know, the Bills, the pass heaviest offense in the NFL, they're down to second in situation neutral pace now, but, you know, they're still a fast paced offense. So there's plenty to go around for all these wide receivers. I mean, Cole Beasley's 18th in expected fantasy points, and Emmanuel Sanders is 19th in expected fantasy points. And Stephon Diggs, he started slow, but he's 5th in expected fantasy points. So you have 3 wide receivers here in the top 20 in expected fantasy points, which, you know, again, just tells you how often the Bills are throwing the football.
And even beyond those guys, Dawson Knox only has 12 targets so far through 3 games, clear 4th on the team, but has run the 9th most pass routes among tight ends. So, I mean, he's probably going to stay the clear 4th option in Buffalo, but there's weekly upside, and he can be the guy that gets 4 targets, catches 3, and scores a touchdown in any given week. So somebody that's kind of nice to have around in a deeper league or as a fallback option if your starter gets injured. And then Zach Moss is a risk-reward running back. He has scored on 11.5% of his touches through his 2 games since returning from being a healthy scratch in week 1. That's not going to continue, but that is the reward. He has that touchdown upside for a team that, again, is implied for the most points this week, and he's getting the goal line stuff.
He's definitely getting the goal line stuff. 5 opportunities inside the 10-yard line last week for Zach Moss, just 1 for Devin Singletary. And Moss was just Buffalo's lead back at all areas of the field last week. He outsnapped Devin Singletary, ran more pass routes. It was 13 carries for Zach Moss to 11 for Singletary. Moss out-targeted Singletary 3-2. I mean, we saw this last year where like Moss would emerge and then like the next game would be Singletary again. So I'm not fully ready to trust it yet. But the matchup, I think, puts both these running backs in play for fantasy this week, and I do prefer Moss among the 2 of them.
Yeah, I'm not going crazy for either one, but if I'm choosing between them, I'm going for Zach Moss for the touchdown upside.
Yep.
Anything else from that game?
No.
Carolina at Dallas, the Cowboys by 5 in this one, over under 50.5. I'm going to go ahead and bet against the Carolina D this week. It's been good so far, but this is going to be the toughest challenge easily.
Yeah, I'm interested to just watch this game and see how this Carolina defense does against, you know, in their toughest test yet. They also just lost first-round corner J.C. Horn to a broken foot. So, you know, it's bad timing there, you know, coming up against this Cowboys defense. But it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I do think the Carolina defense is good. I don't think it's like the best defense in the NFL, like Football Outsiders DVOA says right now. But we'll have a better idea after this game for sure.
Mm-hmm. The Dallas defense is getting some buzz this week as well, but they still sit mid-pack in DVOA. I'm not downgrading any Panthers for this matchup. Sam Darnold is in his usual spot as a fringe starter. DJ Moore is a given. Robbie Anderson is interesting. You wonder whether he's going to actually get more targets this week after Matt Rule gave him the "we want to get him more involved" thing. The problem is that Robbie Anderson has basically been Marquez Valdez-Scantling so far in the way that he's getting used.
Yeah, 18.4 yard average depth of target. So, I mean, you're going to be volatile on that. Dallas is 29th defending deep passes, according to Football Outsiders. So, you know, the matchup there is good for Anderson. I do think targets are going to start coming. Like Anderson's snap rate and his route rate is like right where it was last season. It's just, you know, the targets are just gone to DJ Moore so far. I do think DJ Moore is the number 1 here. Anderson's like the clear number 2, but the gap between them is not going to stay this big throughout the season. So, I would not blame you at all for just sending Robbie Anderson to your bench. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he, you know, has a pretty solid fantasy outing here.
Yeah, Robbie Anderson is far from a must start this week, but in the range of guys like Kenny Galladay, I think that there's at least as much upside to Robbie Anderson and probably more for the matchup. In addition to the stat that you mentioned, according to Ian Hartitz of Pro Football Focus, the Cowboys have allowed a league high 27 explosive plays this year. Not sure exactly what qualifies it as an explosive play, probably either 15 plus or 20 plus yards. But either way, that's the kind of range that we look for Robbie Anderson to do his damage. So there is upside this week if he gets the usage. What we're going to have to watch and see is if Terrace Marshall continues to get more targets per route than what Anderson has gotten so far. That might be the biggest potential drain on Robbie Anderson's upside.
Yeah, and it's really just, I mean, Marshall and Moore are running the short routes. Marshall's average depth of target is 5.8 yards. So it's just, those guys, Marshall and Moore are doing the short stuff, and that's where Darnold's been looking so far. I mean, the other big thing here, obviously, is Christian McCaffrey's out, and, Chuba Hubbard and Royce Freeman aren't going to match his target. So there are extra targets to go around this week.
Yeah, although Mike Davis came pretty close to matching Christian McCaffrey targets last year. So Chuba Hubbard played 40 snaps to Royce Freeman's 11 on Thursday night when we lost McCaffrey, 21-6 in pass snaps, 11-5 in carries, 5-1 in targets. So Chuba Hubbard certainly looks like the top guy with Christian McCaffrey out. I like him in RB2 range. I'm probably not going to play Hubbard over most guys that I drafted within the first 3 rounds of my draft, without running through all the names. A couple guys that stood out to me in the rankings, Chris Carson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I believe I'd go ahead and play those guys over Hubbard this week.
Yeah, I mean, the risk is just that Royce Freeman does more than he did last week. Like, maybe Carolina looks at the tape and they're making their game plan for this week, and they're like, we want to make this more of a 60-40 split in favor of Chuba Hubbard. That's the risk. I think it's going to be pretty close to what we saw after McCaffrey left last week's game. And, in, what was it, about 3 quarters worth of action, Chuba Hubbard was 15th in expected fantasy points among running backs last week, in 3 quarters of the game. So, again, if he gets the work he got last week, like, to me, he's like a high-end RB2, borderline RB1.
We got a question from AJ Austin from Facebook. Says Hubbard, Elijah Mitchell, or Josh Jacobs. Assuming that both Josh Jacobs and Elijah Mitchell are healthy enough to play, I'd still play Hubbard pretty easily over both of them.
Yep, Hubbard for me, Mitchell would be 2, and Jacobs would be 3.
Yes, that's what I would say as well. And we'll get to the Raiders in a little bit. On the Cowboys side, the offense has come way down from the extreme pass heaviness of week 1. So it seems pretty evident that it was a game plan for facing the Bucs rather than a general offensive plan entering the season. They actually ran the ball more than they passed it against the Eagles, just 10th in neutral pass rate through 3 games now after opening the season as a number 1 by a wide margin. So I still think CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper will be just fine. I think they're still easy starts. Dalton Schultz is the guy who's bound for a negative rebound coming off of last week's big numbers.
Yeah, he's not going to do that every week. And, Schultz and Jarwin are still like dead even in routes run. It's been 15 targets for Schultz, just 9 for Blake Jarwin. And I mean, Schultz is 13th in expected fantasy points among tight ends. So it's possible that, he is at least like a borderline tight end 1 the rest of the season. So, if you don't have a locked in starter at tight end, I do think Schultz is a fine streaming option, just, as a decent sized part of this Cowboys passing game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think he's just kind of the steadier option. He's the Zach Ertz here. So you can count on him for probably better catch rate, even though both of the guys have only missed 1 of their targets to date.
Yep.
It is Dalton Schultz up by 6 targets for the season and 6 catches, but 5 of those targets were the split between them against Philly. And again, like you said, there's not really the split in playing time between them. So don't count too much on one over the other. Both Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard remain in lineup consideration. It's easier to like the path for both of those now because of that correction in pass run split that I've talked about we've seen over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, that's helped. Dallas's O-line has looked awesome the past 2 weeks, and Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott are 1st and 2nd in PFF rushing grade over the past 2 weeks. It's Tony Pollard 1, Ezekiel Elliott 2. So to me, like, Zeke is still an RB1. Like, maybe he's not the top 5 guy that we thought he might be just because of Pollard's role, but Zeke's still an RB1 and Pollard's like an every week RB3 flex option.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that game before we move on?
Nope.
Cleveland at Minnesota. The Browns by 2, over under 51 points. Odell Beckham Jr. returned to lead the team with 9 targets last week against Chicago, nearly doubled his actual yardage in air yards. strong wide receiver 2 play from this point, it looks like.
Oh yeah, especially this week against Minnesota. Vikings have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Jarvis Landry out again, obviously, so expect nice volume for Beckham, and the matchup's good.
Mm-hmm. Big week 3 for Kareem Hunt. I think missing Jarvis Landry can obviously only help his target upside, but he still saw similar to usual usage in that game against Chicago. The opportunities came in pockets, including the 2-minute offense at the end of the first half. So obviously Kareem Hunt remains usable at the same level. Just make sure you don't overrate his ultimate numbers in that game against Chicago.
Yeah, Hunt is 32nd among running backs in expected fantasy points through 3 weeks. So he's getting RB3 level usage. I mean, he's a good player in a great situation, so he's going to be more efficient than that. This matchup's good on the ground as well. So, Hunt, as usual, is like a, higher end RB3 in our rankings this week.
Yeah, and his touchdown last week came from 30 yards out, which is both a mark in his favor in that he can score from that range, but also don't overcount him scoring that touchdown.
Yep, for sure.
Demetric Felton, by the way, saw 3 targets in that game before we even saw Kareem Hunt on the field. No more after that. So I'd be curious to see if he does any more. But Demetric Felton is at least in that picture of soaking up those targets.
Yeah, I'd have to look at like the actual PFF data on where he's lining up, but it seems like he's playing more wide receiver for them than like pure running back, which makes sense with all the wide receiver issues they've had early this season.
He looked like he was getting running back type stuff at the beginning of the game. To me, but like I said, after that initial 3 targets, he wasn't really in the target picture, so I don't know how much it matters either way for Kareem Hunt. And at tight end, Austin Hooper scored the touchdown last week, which was a really nice throw by Baker Mayfield, but he and David Njoku are still splitting playing time, so like I said, it's Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz situation with even lower pass volume.
Yeah, I mean, Hooper's still leading slightly in routes and targets, so he's the best fantasy back if you need to dabble in this situation, but you're better off avoiding it.
On the Vikings side of this one, Dalvin Cook returned to limited practice Wednesday, so we're gonna have to watch to make sure, but that probably puts him on track to play.
Yep, and if he plays, you're starting him. Minnesota shown in the past, like even coming off injury, they're just going to go right back to Cook in a workhorse role. And then obviously after what we saw last week, if Cook is out, Alex Madison's like an RB1 anytime Cook's out going forward.
Tyler Conklin missed Wednesday's practice with glute and elbow injury, so we're going to have to watch him after his week 3 breakout game. And he commanded quite a bit of money on the FFPC waivers in those tight end premium leagues.
Yeah, I'd be careful still with Conklin. Like, his playing time, his pass routes didn't really climb last week. To me, it's like it's either going to be Conklin or Osborne every week as like the third option in the passing game. There's probably not enough to go around for both of them to have busy days. I just think it's going to rotate. So I think Conklin's still going to have plenty of down games. He'll have some useful weeks as well too. But he's not like an every week guy still.
Yes, I agree with that, especially when he starts off the week dealing with injuries. Kirk Cousins though is looking maybe not every week, but right now this week for sure 6th among fantasy quarterbacks. He's been over 25 fantasy points in every game so far and has not scored a rushing touchdown. So it's not like he's inflating those things with numbers that he can't sustain. I'm not saying that he's an every week player, as I said, but Kirk Cousins is something better than a streamer right now.
He is. He's playing well. He's producing in fantasy. I do think this is his toughest spot yet. I know Cleveland's like defensive metrics aren't great so far, but there's a lot of talent on that defense. Cousins is, I just think it's the toughest spot yet. So I prefer like Darnold and Derek Carr as week 4 starters. But beyond that I think that's when you start to consider Cousins.
I think that all 3 of those guys are extremely similar. I wouldn't put money down on one of those versus the other 2 because I think they can finish in any order, I guess is the best way for me to say it.
They definitely can. It's fantasy football.
Anything else in that game?
No.
Indianapolis at Miami. The Dolphins by 1.5, over under 42.5, which tells you how exciting it's going to be for fantasy purposes. But maybe it's a bounce back spot for Jonathan Taylor. Ran well against Tennessee, 64 rushing yards on just 10 carries. And really, I'm not sure why he didn't get more than that because this game was pretty close most of the way. There was like one particular possession that illustrated the Colts making strange decisions on not giving Jonathan Taylor the ball. He ran it down to the Tennessee 9-yard line for 1st and goal from there. And then the Colts threw 3 straight incomplete passes toward the end zone rather than give Jonathan Taylor the ball at all on those possessions. He leads the league with 6 carries inside the 5-yard line so far, has not scored a touchdown. He's one of just 5 players with 2+ carries in that range to not have scored a touchdown so far. You'd like to see more passing game usage, but I think in general, there's enough to like about Jonathan Taylor to feel pretty good about using him this week.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably the biggest positive regression candidate at running back. So Taylor's 28th at the position in half PPR points. He's 6th in our expected fantasy points. And that's largely because, as you said, he's had all those goal line carries and just hasn't scored yet. So things are going to get better. There are still concerns, though. He has just 4 targets over the last 2 weeks now. He's running a pass route on just 34% of the pass plays. And Indy's O-line is not good right now. They're 31st in PFF's run blocking grades. Taylor's averaging 2.4 yards before contact per attempt. That's down from 3 last year, so a pretty significant dip there. So, kind of all the reasons that we made Taylor our first-round bust are kind of coming to fruition. So he's going to be volatile from week to week in the role that he's playing. But this is a pretty good spot. Miami's run defense is beatable, and it's a game where the Colts, should be able to keep it close or even play with the lead and, keep giving Taylor the ball.
Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in a whole lot else on that Colts offense. Michael Pittman's okay as a volume PPR flex, but it's not a great matchup for him on the outside.
Yeah, Pittman's the guy I wanted to talk about. Like you said, it is a tough matchup, but he's tied for 14th among wide receivers in targets with 28. He's 17th in air yards. He's 6th in our expected fantasy points. So he's getting good usage. I mean, Carson Wentz's play is a problem. The O-line's a problem. The matchup here is a problem. But to me, Pittman's in play as a wide receiver 3 this week, and he might be better than that if the offense gets going and if as these matchups get a bit easier.
I think he looks very similar to Kenny Golladay for this week. I agree that there's general upside, and I would say I like him in general.
Yep.
On the Miami side, do we chase the target volume that Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki got last week?
If Will Fuller's out and he missed practice on Wednesday with a couple injuries, I think I don't have it in front of me. I mean, the way they're using Waddle like the Jags are using Laviska Shenault, just all short stuff. And, Waddle hasn't really done anything after the catch yet. He's obviously capable. I don't know. Trust is too strong a word with anything in this offense, but especially if Fuller is out, I think Waddle's an okay wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I agree with okay wide receiver 3, and it's tough for me to just believe in anything from this Miami offense. We absolutely could get similar usage, and I don't think there's any reason to believe in somebody else over Waddle. Gesicki's a little bit easier because he's at a position where he's not competing against a bunch of other guys. We're talking about how we can't even count on Dallas Goedert to get targets, so why not bet that Mike Gesicki gets 8 of them? I think the other guy worth talking about is Myles Gaskin. And he's okay as a low RB2 if the game stays close. 5+ yards per carry in each game so far. Week 3 was the first time, though, that he reached 10 carries in a game. Has seen decent targets, 5, 5, and 6 of those in the 3 games. So, fine usage. Again, it's just kind of tough to trust anything really in Miami right now.
Gaskin is Chase Edmonds on a much worse offense. Like, the rushing volume is not great, but he's 7th among all running backs in targets, and the fantasy production has been steady. Even in half PPR, he's finished RB23, RB33, and RB30. So he's not going to win you weeks, but he's not killing you either. And he's 24th among running backs in our expected fantasy points. So he's fine. Like, there's not much upside, but again, the passing volume makes him a pretty safe weekly bet.
Yes, he's not a guy that you're going to argue for, but he's like, I don't have a whole lot else here, so Gaskin will be fine.
Yes.
Both defenses, I think, are in play in this game, and especially Miami is I like better. They're at home. They're 7th in Football Outsiders DVOA, so they're playing well in general. They're also tops in Football Outsiders variance metric, which means they're the lowest variance defense to this point. So the most consistently performing defense week to week through 3 weeks. It's still early, so that can change. But I like all that against the upside of Carson Wentz, who – it was nice that he made it through the game last week on 2 sprained ankles, but there were also plenty of errant throws that could have gone much worse.
Yeah, and one of those is a high ankle sprain, so that's not to 100%. Yeah, and again, the offensive line for the Colts has not been good, so it's definitely a good spot for Miami. And then, the Colts defense is fine against Brissett.
Mm-hmm. Tennessee at the New York Jets. Tennessee by 7 points in this one, 44-point over/under. The first question is, will the Titans have either A.J. Brown or Julio Jones for this game?
Brown, I'm guessing no, because he's expected to miss 1 to 2 weeks. That makes me think he's definitely out this week. And then Julio, we don't know much about his injury, but he didn't practice on Wednesday, so there's definitely a chance he misses too. And that obviously hurts Ryan Tannehill's fantasy outlook. Like, you want to start him against the Jets, but And if he's throwing to, Nick Westbrook, Akini, and Chester Rogers and Cameron Batson, like it's tough to get excited about him.
Yeah, so that's the second question is, if both of these guys are out, are you playing anybody else besides Derrick Henry from these Tennessee Titans this week, even against the Jets?
So the one guy I'm kind of interested in, it'd probably be more DFS, is Anthony Firkser, who returned to a full practice on Wednesday. He missed the past 2 games, right, with his knee injury, but full go on Wednesday, so he should be back. And if you look at his week 1 usage, so he ran her out on 64% of the pass plays. It's a decent number, but again, that could and really should go up if Jones and AJ Brown are out. And then Firkser, even in week 1, he played 84% of his snaps out wider in the slot. So he was basically just playing wide receiver for them. So he might just like act as their number 1 wide receiver in this game if those top 2 guys are out. So Firkser, at least in DFS, is interesting. And maybe if you're desperate in season long, he's a guy you can pick up and use this week.
Let's pump those brakes a little bit on what should happen with Tennessee tight ends, because we spent all of last year talking about what should happen with Jonnu Smith's usage, and it never did. So I agree that there's potential opportunity. And I saw somebody add Anthony Firkser for like $1 in our FFPC main event league. And I was like, that was probably a better move than any of the high-priced tight ends this week. But certainly somebody that I'm more like, all right, let's see what happens with him then, and a DFS I don't know, focal point, but he's more interesting for DFS this week, like you said, than I think for season long.
Agreed.
We'll see too how he fits exactly with Jeff Swaim coming back from that injury. I'm curious to see what the usage looks like. Ryan Tannehill, meanwhile, with those wide receiver injuries, I think it's tough to put him inside the top 12 this week. I'm not saying, full fade on him, but he's just kind of mixed into that streaming territory outside the top 12.
Yeah, he's not going to have volume on his side. I mean, the Titans are already the 4th run heaviest offense in the NFL. Teams are going run heavy against the Jets. And then, even the efficiency for Tannehill figures to take a step back if he doesn't have his top 2 wideouts.
Mm-hmm. On the Jets side, Corey Davis and nothing else for me. And Elijah Moore is dealing with a concussion. So, I mean, that can only help Corey Davis's target count. I'm not sure there's another player worth talking about there.
Nope, there's not. Davis is a volume-based play. Michael Carter has kind of emerged as the lead back here. And it doesn't matter if the Jets offense is playing so poorly, but I'm just saying if they start to get it together and, Carter is getting this type of usage, he could be someone you can use. So if Carter was dropped in your league, I would add him. If we're talking leagues of like 12 plus teams, I think he should at least be on rosters as a potential option in the second half of the season.
I can get on board with that. He's stashable, but you definitely lost me with if they get it together, because I don't think that's coming for the Jets offense this year.
Maybe not.
Detroit at Chicago, Bears by 2.5 points, over under a 41.5. It's the second lowest total by a half point for the week. The DeAndre Swift is delivering, and now he's reportedly over that groin issue. I think he's a hold or even acquire more than he is a sell high in fantasy right now. In our Discord, we've had multiple people ask about DeAndre Swift deals, and I'm on board with adding DeAndre Swift where it's possible, because I think you might find some people who think they are selling high on him right now.
I guess. I mean, he's RB3 in PPR points. He's RB4 in half PPR. He's even RB7 in non-PPR. So, he's been producing. He's 4th in expected fantasy points. I mean, the passing game usage is just awesome. And then if he starts to get more on the ground, that's even better, obviously.
Yeah, and we don't even need it. He can just be subsisting totally on the receiving stuff and just get a little bit on the ground. Yep. It's also, this game is a fine spot, I think, for Jamal Williams' usage, who he has stayed plenty involved. He was plenty involved last week. So Jamal Williams remains in the picture, obviously a much lower ceiling than DeAndre Swift in general. Yeah,
Williams is an RB3 to me. He had the massive week 1 kind of fluky game against San Francisco, but he's been RB39 and RB24 the last 2 weeks, which I think is a good, kind of span for where he's going to finish. So a fine RB3, but, Swift, obviously the guy to own in this backfield.
Yep. Anything else from the Detroit side?
No, Quintez Cephas we thought was going to be a thing, and he's not.
Yep, I agree. On the Bears side, Justin Fields wasn't as hopeless as the numbers say, but it's an overall hopeless situation. He's got some issues that he needs to work through, obviously, which we all expect from a rookie quarterback. He also needs some support from his coaches in the game plan. I mean, get the guy running some, roll him out so that he can find some open field. It was a crappy combination of everything involved in that game against Cleveland that just helped it make a disaster for, I don't know, anybody involved. And now we don't even know if he's going to play this week because Andy Dalton might be ready to go.
I mean, this is just why I preferred like Trey Lance over Fields in Dynasty, just because I just don't trust Chicago to surround Fields with what he needs to be surrounded with. The O-line's just a mess. I think that was the biggest issue for Fields last week. Now the spot is like infinitely better, on the road against Myles Garrett last week, and now he's at home against Detroit. You can't trust him as a quarterback one. I do think in two quarterback leagues, you could still use him, and in DFS, maybe you can still use him in tournaments. And yeah, like you said, that's assuming it's Fields, because Andy Dalton was limited in Wednesday's practice, and Matt Nagy said he's going back to Dalton when he's healthy. So we'll see.
If Justin Fields starts this week, I will submit a tournament lineup that has Justin Fields on it, because I can't let the first good Justin Fields game happen and me get nothing out of it. But that's definitely all I can say about him. I have him in a 2-quarterback league, and I regretted starting him over Teddy Bridgewater last week alongside Daniel Jones. So that won't be in play this week. It's going to be Bridgewater and Daniel Jones over Justin Fields.
Oof. I'd start Fields over Bridgewater, I think.
Mm-hmm. Nah, no thanks. David Montgomery, I think, is the only guy that I'm using with relative comfort among Bears this week. He should see better game script against the Lions this week. That said, the game script should not have limited him to 10 carries against Cleveland. Even though they got dominated overall, the score wasn't out of hand for most of the game. They just weren't giving him the ball, and the O-line stunk. It just stinks in general. That's going to stay an issue, but we should be able to count on more touches for David Montgomery this week.
Yeah, the Bears O-line stinks. Detroit's run defense stinks too, so that probably just cancels out this week. And Damian Williams is just being phased out of the Bears offense. Like, Montgomery is dominating work. He had all 10 of the RB carries last week. He had a 20% target share. So if that kind of usage continues, he's going to be a strong fantasy play, especially in matchups like this.
Allen Robinson, however, just wide receiver 3 range for me this week. And I mean, it's bound to get better than last week, but it has to get a whole lot better before we can really feel good about him.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy I would try to keep in lineups. Like, I can't even call him a must start, but I would try to keep him in lineups just because of the matchup, really. I mean, that's kind of all you can point to at this point. I mean, he's not even playing well. PFF has him 68th in their receiving grades among 76 qualifiers. And then the usage hasn't been great. He's only 33rd among wide receivers in targets. So definitely concerned, but hoping this matchup kind of gets Robinson going.
If you had to decide whether to start Marvin Jones tonight or Allen Robinson on Sunday, who would you be playing?
Jones.
Yeah, I think I would have to do the same thing. Darnell Mooney also a wait and see. I mean, Andy Dalton might be better for them this week just because we've seen an okay game from him, but it's certainly not like, oh, all right, Andy Dalton's back. These guys are back to producing now.
Right.
Anything else from this game? Say no.
Nope.
All right. Washington at Atlanta. Washington by 2.5. It opened with Atlanta as a 1-point favorite, so significant shift here. Over under 47.5 points. It's a strongly positive defensive matchup for both sides, Washington versus Atlanta, but it's just the 8th highest game total for the week. It dropped by 0.5 point while I was preparing my notes for this show. So I think you should keep all of that in mind. I think use the matchups as a tiebreaker rather than something that vaults players into your starting lineup who don't belong there.
Yeah, I mean, Washington's defense, I still think they should turn it around. There's just too much talent. Atlanta's defense is not going to turn it around, so I do think it's a good matchup on the Washington side. I kind of like Taylor Heineke. I mean, you shouldn't have to use him in 1-quarterback leagues. I do think he's a nice quarterback too, potential DFS play. He's finished quarterback 13 and then quarterback 9 in fantasy points over the past 2 weeks. Washington is first in situation neutral pass rate over the last 2 weeks. So they're not like trying to protect Taylor Heineke. They're letting him drop back and chuck it. And the matchup's good, obviously, against Atlanta. They've allowed 8 touchdowns through the first 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, Taylor Heineke, I'm not going to overreach for him. I would definitely play him over Justin Fields. I would play him over like Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, probably not ahead of Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold.
Not ahead of those guys. I think I'd play Heineke over Ryan Tannehill, though.
Yeah, I can see that one. That's one where it's probably a coin flip for me, but I think there's a higher ceiling for Heineke this week. Assuming
Julio and Brown are out, I would use Heineke.
Right. And then elsewhere on the Washington offense, I think Terry McLaurin's an easy start. Antonio Gibson, Logan Thomas, fairly easy in this matchup as well.
Yep. I mean, Logan Thomas has been the high floor play that we've talked about. He's been top 13 among tight ends in fantasy points every week so far this season. And Gibson, I mean, we know the story. If they fall behind, it's an issue for Gibson, but they really shouldn't fall behind too badly in this game. And it's a good matchup for Gibson. So I like him quite a bit this week.
Yeah, if they fall behind in this game, they have much bigger issues than their running back usage. Atlanta, it's a better spot for Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, Mike Davis, Cordero Patterson. All those guys were in consideration in general. I'm not reaching, though, for Matt Ryan in this matchup or anybody else.
No, I mean, I think Ryan's just about done. The numbers say it's a good matchup, but I still think Washington's D is going to turn it around. So definitely like playing Heineke over Matt Ryan this week. If you're deciding between those two guys, then yeah, I mean, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, their usage is fine. I think the problem with them is Matt Ryan just not playing well, but the usage is there, so you got to stick with those guys.
Yeah, I guess I suppose it's worth remembering that Washington started out with Justin Herbert. They played Josh Allen last week. Who was the opponent in between those two?
Was it Carolina?
That was the Giants. So they got Daniel Jones in between there. So, I mean, that's the one game where you're like, why didn't they do anything against Daniel Jones? I agree that there's definitely rebound potential. We'll see. It's Matt Ryan. So if they don't get it done in this game, it's going to be time to forget that the Washington defense exists, I think.
Yep, that's fair.
Arizona at the LA Rams. Rams by 4.5. That's down 1.5 points from where it opened. So they were heavier favorites to begin with. Over under of 55 is up 1.5. It's the highest total for the week by 1.5. Starting on the Arizona side, DeAndre Hopkins is clearly not right now. He had just 6 targets, 3 catches, 21 yards against Jacksonville. That's just a game that he should do whatever he wants. So now he's likely to see Jalen Ramsey in primary coverage this week. It's not quite enough to knock DeAndre Hopkins out of starter territory, but it's quite possible that there are fantasy teams out there that have better options available.
Yeah, I mean, he's a wide receiver too in our week 4 rankings. And the funny thing, though, is his playing time was there last week. I mean, it was 92% of the snaps, 97% of the pass routes, so he wasn't limited there. And even before this rib injury, his target share was down over the first 2 weeks of the season. So maybe it's just, you have Christian Kirk and AJ Green and Rondale Moore. Maybe it's just he's just not going to be a target hog this season. But I mean, again, he's on the field and this offense is playing so well. Like I definitely wouldn't want to bench Hopkins. It's possible you have 3 better options, but in most cases, I would stick with him this week.
He's tied with AJ Green for the team target lead on the season, just 1 target ahead of Christian Kirk and Chase Edmonds, 4th on the team in receiving yards. I think the target share will pick up. I'll be curious to see as we get a little further from this rib injury. And he missed practice again Wednesday, I believe.
Yes.
So, clearly not really at risk of missing the game, but it seems like it's bothering him. I'll be curious to see when we do finally get clear of it, when he's back to full practice and if the numbers change.
Yeah, he's 42nd among wide receivers in expected fantasy points. So that tells you how disappointing the usage has been so far.
Kirk, Moore, Green, I think are all risk-reward plays. The matchup for them is among those guys is worst for AJ Green because he's outside. He'll face probably some Jalen Ramsey, some Darius Williams on the other side. I would not be surprised to see more targets for Arizona funneled to the slot receivers and just middle of the field in general in this game.
Yeah, I'd rank those other guys, Kirk, then Green, then Rondale Moore. I mean, Moore just because he's not on the field enough, and we saw the downside that brings last week. It does seem like what Rondale Moore needs is the Cardinals to be playing from behind because that's when they use more four wide receiver sets, and that's when Moore is getting on the field. So, they're underdogs here on the road against the Rams, so it's possible we get more on the field this week. But he easily has the lowest floor among these Cardinals wide receivers.
Mm-hmm. And Chase Edmonds should be fine again, as we say in general.
Yeah, again, he's getting that passing game usage to make him a pretty safe weekly play.
On the Rams side, is it officially time to worry about Robert Woods yet?
You can worry. I'd still start him in most cases this week as like a wide receiver 3. I mean, I don't know, some teams have 3 better options, I'm sure, but it's kind of the same deal as Robbie Anderson. Like Woods' playing time is still there. I don't think the gap between Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods is going to stay this big all season long. And, this Rams passing game, offense in general, looks awesome. They shouldn't have trouble against the Cardinals this week. So there's still plenty of upside for Woods this week. Yeah,
and one aspect that is bound to change at least some for the Rams is the sheer volume. They've spent almost the whole season leading so far. Yeah. Matthew Stafford ranks just 22nd in the league in pass attempts. The team, though, is 14th in neutral pass rate. So it's not like they've been specifically going run heavy. They just don't have to throw the ball a whole lot. They're not running a ton of plays. If we get closer games, if we get the Rams trailing a little bit, maybe we get more passing volume. Maybe that helps Robert Woods rebound some. Like you said, certainly time for some concern. Not time to just give up on Robert Woods this season. We'll see where it goes. We also got good news from Tyler Higbee last week. He showed us why we should just leave him in lineups. He paid off our patience.
Yep. Still, a top 10 tight end in usage. And again, just a big part of what is a passing game we definitely want to be invested in.
Darrell Henderson was back to a limited practice on Wednesday. We got to watch for reports on him. Not only watch his participation to make sure he stays on track to play, but I'll be curious to see if we get any kind of reports on how the Rams expect to use them. Sony Michel, 20 carries, 4 targets in Henderson's absence versus the Bucs. So stepped into a workhorse level role and fared pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big storyline for me the rest of this week because I like this spot for the Rams running game. The Cardinals have allowed 5.0 yards per carry to running backs this season. Football Outsiders has them 19th in run defense. And, Henderson was getting feature back usage before that injury, but the concern with him all along has been durability. The Rams made a trade for Sony Michel before the season started, so I won't be surprised if it's more of a split going forward now. But I don't know, if Henderson plays, he has to be the top fantasy bet in this Rams backfield. And again, I do think the matchup makes it a spot where you'd probably want to use Henderson in fantasy lineups.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, though, because that rib injury especially is one that you see them limit a running back if they can. If a guy's not like a clear workhorse, because it's a pain management issue. And the more times you get hit, the more likely that you're going to be in pain there. So I would be surprised if we see Henderson get back to his normal usage, even if he is, ready to go for this game. But it's going to be something to watch because we're probably going to be guessing heading into the game.
Yep.
Seattle at San Francisco, Niners by 2.5 points, over under a 52. Russell Wilson's 4 meetings with the 49ers over the past 2 years have produced a couple of meh games, 1 bad outing, and 1 4-touchdown outing. So that one upside game, that's what I'm chasing still with Russell Wilson. I know he's not at the, he's not high in starter territory, but I'm more interested in that upside than being at all concerned because I don't think this matchup has huge downside risk.
Yeah, I mean, the Niners defense doesn't scare me. Russ is just playing so well. I mean, he's quarterback 11 in fantasy points despite being just 26th in pass attempts. So he's just been super efficient. I'm not scared of this matchup. So, I mean, I think, if Russ has been your guy through the first 3 weeks, you're definitely sticking with him this week.
Mm-hmm. Tyler Lockett left Sunday's game early with a hip injury, but put in a limited practice Wednesday. So that's good news for his chances of playing.
That's a weird one. It was reported as a knee, like during the game. Then he shows up on an injury report with a hip. Either way, being out there on Wednesday means he should be fine for the game on Sunday.
Gerald Everett more than doubled his season targets last week, saw 5 of them against Minnesota after 2 targets in each of the first 2 games. Should we believe in Gerald Everett's role?
Well, he's on the COVID list now, so he needs to get off of that. He does seem to be trending up. He's in the Tyler Conklin, Austin Hooper kind of territory. Is a guy you probably need a touchdown from, but catching passes from Russell Wilson, he's always a decent touchdown bet.
Yeah, and when he does get healthy again, he doubled Will Dissly in playing time in that game, tripled Will Dissly in routes. So if Gerald Everett gets dropped in a deeper league, maybe it's time to stash him. If you're in the kind of league where a backup tight end makes sense.
Yep.
Chris Carson's passing game usage headed the other direction from where Gerald Everett's did, and it continued a direction that started in week 2 in terms of the usage on Travis Homer and Alex Collins versus Chris Carson in the passing game. I just refuse to believe that Seattle is looking at this and thinking, well, Travis Homer and Alex Collins give us a better chance in the passing game than Chris Carson. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with Carson, trust that they reverse that trend, that it's more noise than signal, and see what happens with Chris Carson in this matchup. San Francisco's mid-pack and everything on defense, so the matchup itself doesn't scare me. I'm just going to go ahead and trust Chris Carson.
I mean, even if the passing game usage doesn't rebound, he's still a decent RB2. He's 15th in the NFL in carries. He's been getting it done. He's been a top 20 fantasy back in all 3 weeks so far. That if he continues to lose passing game work, that obviously hurts. So we'll keep an eye on it. But yeah, I do think generally you're sticking with Carson as an RB2.
On the 49ers side, Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle took big rebound steps last week for us, with Ayuk it was sheer opportunity. Kittle was a little bit more subtle. His rebound came in average depth of target, a season high 8.2 yards versus the Packers. That was up from 5.6 in week 1 and -2 yards against the Eagles on a truly goofy usage day for him in week 2. Sat out Wednesday with calf soreness, so that's something we're going to have to watch this week. Kyle Shanahan said, quote, he should be all right this week, just sorer today than we expected. So again, we'll have to watch George Kittle this week.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the calf thing. He's been up over 80% of their outs in each of the past 2 games after being at 57% in week 1. So it's been encouraging for Kittle. He's going to be fine. Then, yeah, Brandon Ayuk, I mean, he's back at least like a wide receiver 3, which kind of what I had him as all along. I thought he was overvalued in drafts, but I think he's back to wide receiver 3 status. Ran a route on 90% of the pass plays last week. That was, clearly number 2 behind only Deebo Samuel. Saw 6 targets in that game, 15% target share. I mean, the volume's still a concern for me just because it's a lower volume passing offense and you have Deebo and you have Kittle. So don't go crazy with Ayuk, but again, he's back to being a full-time player. So he is back in play as a wide receiver 3.
Hey, almost cracked our top 36 this week, just to give you a little bit more context for where we have him. Elijah Mitchell returned to a limited practice on Wednesday after missing last week with his shoulder injury. So we'll watch to make sure he's trending toward playing. But Trey Sermon didn't do anything against Green Bay on Sunday night that would shove Elijah Mitchell out of the way.
I mean, I thought Sermon looked fine, but it was clear the Niners didn't fully trust him. I mean, they gave Kyle Juszczyk 5 carries. Juszczyk played almost as many snaps as Sermon. So, clearly someone they don't want to turn the backfield over to. So I do think if Mitchell's healthy, he's going to step back in as the lead back. And it's a great matchup. Seattle is dead last in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs that, they've given up huge games to Derrick Henry and then Alex Madison the past 2 weeks.
Pittsburgh at Green Bay, Packers by 6.5 points, over under 45.5. Vegas has the Steelers implied for 19.5 points this week. That'd be more than they scored at home either of the past 2 games. They had 10 points against Cincinnati on Sunday. So I don't know. I'm taking the under on 19.5 for these Steelers at the moment. They did get Deontay Johnson back to a limited practice Wednesday. He missed last week with a knee injury, but Juju Smith-Schuster sat out practice with a rib injury.
Yeah, bruised ribs for Juju. So it seems like something he should be able to play through. He's a low end fantasy option just, based on his short range usage with a, washed up quarterback in Big Ben. Deontay Johnson's still the guy to start here if he's active. Deontay was 4th and then 7th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points the first 2 weeks of the season. So, the usage has continued to be there, even though the efficiency is probably going to suffer with Big Ben at quarterback.
Do you think we should gauge how many TikTok posts Juju makes this week to determine whether he's going to play on Sunday?
That's like the only way to determine, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think, if Johnson's good, I guess Juju also being healthy enough to play would complicate things. Are we playing all 3 of these guys for target upside in this game because we expect it to go the way that the Vegas line says?
Yeah, I mean, Claypool and Juju are wide receiver 3s to me. Deontay's clearly the best target bet when he's healthy. Claypool's big playability is just getting wasted with Roethlisberger at quarterback, but he's still getting enough volume to be fine.
Don't worry, it's going to get fully unlocked once Dwayne Haskins takes over.
Yeah, or Mason Rudolph.
Najee Harris, by the way, it's easier to start him at that position, but he's in for the same reason. It's target upside. The running game's going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, 19 targets for Najee last week. I mean, that was no Deontay and Juju getting knocked out. I mean, he's not going to see that going forward. That's why we start guys who are on the field basically every offensive snap. Like when you're out there, you have the opportunity to rack up those touches.
And that's it for the Pittsburgh side. You're not starting anybody else, right?
Nope. Ebron moved back ahead of Freiermuth in routes last week. So, yeah, I'm still stashing Freiermuth. He caught a touchdown last week, but you can't trust him in fantasy lineups yet.
Yeah, I'm more interested in Dalton Schultz than either of those guys, which is
me too.
Yeah. On the Packers side, this could be the week for Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Steelers 18th in overall defensive DVOA, 6th against the run, 23rd against the pass. They're vulnerable, I think, at cornerback, and I think that maybe this is finally the week we get targets for Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Not pushing him too far up, but in that wide receiver 4 range that we've been talking about, there's upside.
Well, last week was the week. We got the big play. We got the touchdown. He started on most of my best ball teams. But MVS is dealing with a hamstring injury now that he suffered at the very end of that game last week. So we'll see if he plays. yeah, still not someone I'd want to trust in season-long lineups, but I'm telling you, he's gonna pay off in best ball.
Yeah, forget about what I said. I forgot about the hamstring injury, and I'm not taking a speed guy with a bad hamstring. So
Yeah.
we'll just erase that part. Certainly not worrying about Aaron Jones, despite what I just said about the DVOA for Pittsburgh. I mean, Aaron Jones is in starting lineups anyway. But maybe we get a little bit more passing from the Green Bay offense in this one. 22nd in neutral pass rate so far through 3 games. Green Bay was 8th in the league in that category last season. So, don't be surprised if we get a little bit more pass leaning attack.
Teams are also passing against the Steelers at the 6th highest rate, which is smart again because they've been so much better against the run in the past so far. So yeah, could be a big day for A-Raj and Devontae Adams.
And I mean, if MVS ends up being out for this game, maybe we keep an eye on guys like Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb.
Yeah, I mean, Lazard would probably be the replacement as the outside guy, and then Cobb gets some more snaps in the slot. But DFS only for those type of guys.
Mm-hmm. Baltimore at Denver. Broncos by 1 point here, over under 45. Lamar Jackson remains in starter territory, certainly in our rankings, and he will be the biggest test so far for this Denver defense that has allowed the fewest QB fantasy points in the league so far. They played Daniel Jones, they played Zach Wilson, they played Trevor Lawrence. So a pretty easy run of quarterbacks. 17th among QBs in passing grade so far, according to PFF, though, for Lamar Jackson, even just 7th in rushing grade. Both of those are in line with what he got last year in terms of PFF grades, but also they remain down versus his 2019 numbers. So we might just be seeing Lamar Jackson settle at the level he was last year, which is fine, which is still useful for fantasy, but maybe just not the top shelf fantasy quarterback that we got a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And, I do believe and, respect this Broncos defense despite their easy start to the season. I think it's, top 5 defense. So I think you downgrade Lamar to like a low end quarterback one this week. But, definitely somebody you can still use. The rushing production is still going to be there for him.
Greg Roman said today that Jackson is dealing with, quote, a little back flare up. I don't think it's anything serious. We'll wait and see. So, we'll watch him throughout the week. It sounds like he should play, but something else to maybe be a little bit concerned about. I would play Jalen Hurts, Russell Wilson, and Aaron Rodgers over Lamar Jackson this week, which would still put him right in the bottom of top 12 territory.
Yeah, none of those are crazy. Hurts and Rodgers. I'd probably go Lamar over those two, but they're all close.
There's not much else I'm interested in with Baltimore beyond, Mark Andrews is Mark Andrews, but Tyson Williams is worth talking about because we've now seen worrisome usage with him in 2 of the Ravens' 3 games. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that it's a committee backfield. I mean, Latavius Murray's going to be involved. Devontae Freeman's going to mix in for a few carries every game. It's strange, though. Like, Tyson Williams' snap rate was right where it was the first couple weeks. Even his route rate was right around the same. He just didn't get the carries last week. So I'm kind of writing it off as like a 1-week fluke. I do still think Tyson Williams is the lead back here, the best bat for carries. But I mean, don't expect 18, 19, 20 carry games. It's going to be 12 to 15 carries every game. Yeah, and like Tony Pollard looks like a better option weekly than Tyson Williams to me. Yeah, I think they're similar. Marquise Brown's okay, but it's not a good matchup for him considering the Denver corners. I would probably take a shot on somebody like Kenny Golladay over Marquise Brown this week. He cost me so much money last week with those drops. He dropped 97 air yards worth of passes, and he would have had a lot of yards after the catch. He dropped over 100 yards worth of passes last week. His usage has still been awesome. He is 15th among wideouts in expected fantasy points. So, the matchup's tough. I think it downgrades him, but to me, he's still in the wide receiver 3 mix. He is in the mix down there. The Broncos are allowing just a 55% catch rate to all wideouts so far, and that falls to 50% if you take out Sterling Shepard's 7 for 113 and a touchdown on 9 targets back in week 1. Rashad Bateman, we should get back here pretty soon. Yeah. He's back on the field. I don't think he's officially active yet, though, is he? No, he's eligible to practice now. I would not expect him to play this week, but maybe in the next few weeks. And he should really just take over the Sammy Watkins role, which has been producing decent volume. And I think Bateman's a better player than Watkins at this point. So I think Bateman's worth stashing, in fantasy leagues of 12 plus teams. Yeah, certainly a deeper league's an interesting stash. It might be tough for him to become a regular fantasy contributor in this situation, but his return should help Lamar Jackson, who could, use another receiving option, especially a good young player. Yep. The Baltimore defense, which we've come to respect, is 20th in overall DVOA right now, 10th against the run, 21st against the pass. I'd bet on Denver to win this game, so I think the game script should be fine for the Denver running backs. The problem is that Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams remain pretty even in terms of what they're doing on the field. They're separated by 3 carries and 1 target for the season through 3 games, and Melvin Gordon was still playing more snaps than Javonte Williams last week.
You want to make a beer bet? Because I like Baltimore to win this game.
Oh, yeah, sure.
All right. Lock it in. Nice. Yeah, backfield kind of same story. You know, Gordon's the better fantasy bet right now because, you know, even if the carries are split, Gordon's getting more of the passing game work. Javonte Williams also had that fumble near the goal line at the end of last week's game. So we'll see if that impacts his status at all in this backfield.
So do you like Teddy Bridgewater better if you expect Baltimore to take a lead in this game and Baltimore's defense is 21st against the pass?
I mean, I don't like Teddy as a quarterback 1 spot starter this week. I don't know. I think it's like a middling matchup. And now he lost KJ Hamler to go along with Jerry Jeudy. So, what looked like a strong wide receiver core to start the season doesn't look so strong anymore.
We got a Teddy Bridgewater question way back in the chat. Oh, here it is. Teddy Bridgewater or Daniel Jones? I think in that case, I would take Teddy Bridgewater for the floor.
I think I'd go Jones just hope he, runs for 40 yards.
That's when you've got a rough quarterback decision for the week. That was Michael Andrade on Facebook, by the way, with that question.
Pick up Taylor Heineke. He's got to be available.
Man, week 4, and we're already talking Taylor Heineke or Teddy Bridgewater. Back to the Baltimore Denver game. Cortland Sutton, I do think, is a solid option, regardless of what you think about Teddy Bridgewater. He followed his breakthrough game against the Jags with just 5 targets against the Jets last week, but he caught all 5 of them. And now, as you mentioned, KJ Hamler is out in addition to Jerry Jeudy. So targets should not be an issue for Sutton, and the matchup is not scary the way that it once might have been against Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, just 25 pass attempts for Bridgewater last week was the problem. I think, Tim Patrick gets a boost now, too, with KJ Hamler out. It's going to be Deontay Spencer and Kendall Hinton, of quarterback fame last season, Kendall Hinton, behind Sutton and Patrick on the wide receiver depth chart. So I think Patrick should get more volume than he has been getting, and that's been the problem. I mean, he's been super efficient, but he just hasn't been getting more than like 4 or 5 targets a game. I think that could definitely change this week.
Yeah, Tim Patrick, I'm not even sure where he is in our wide receiver rankings right now, but he's probably too low. He did match Sutton with 5 targets last week and caught all 5 of them for 98 yards. So I agree, a solid option this week. It was frustrating to see Noah Fant get only 3 targets last week, but he still played twice as many snaps as Albert O. And again, the Hamler injury just frees up more potential target opportunity. Yeah,
Fant is still 7th among tight ends in targets. He's 13th in air yards, and he's 7th in our expected fantasy points. So I mean, he's still a mid-range tight end 1.
And he and Bridgewater are going to go off and win me some beer this week now. Anything else from that game?
No.
Tampa Bay at New England on Sunday night. The Bucks by 7. That's up 1.5 from where it opened. It's a 49-point over-under. No interesting storylines in this game with Tampa Bay heading to New England. Antonio Brown, though, is back from the COVID list. Otherwise, I think things look pretty similar. The Bucks pretty similar to last week. The Bucks face a challenging defense, but there's nothing really sneaky or overly worrisome in the Patriots group. They have played the pass much tougher than the run. They've also faced the easiest schedule through 3 games, according to Football Outsiders DVOA. So I don't think I'm altering what I would normally do for any of my Bucks players for this game.
No, me either. I mean, you just know Brady's going to want to come in and stuff the stat sheet in his return to New England. So I'm expecting a pass-heavy game plan here. So you're starting all your usuals in the Bucks passing game. We'll see about Gio Bernard, who hurt his knee at the end of last week's game. And we saw the big Bernard pass-catching game last week with the Bucks playing from behind. That's what's going to happen when the Bucks are playing from behind. That's just not going to happen very often. So, but if Bernard is out of this game, I mean, Fournette should take over that passing down work. So that would make him a lot easier to trust in fantasy lineups. Yeah,
Gio Bernard gets back healthy and keeps going. He might just be J.D. McKissick one day. It's also worth noting that Rob Gronkowski missed practice Wednesday with a rib injury, so we'll have to watch him.
Yep, he returned to that game last week with that injury, so he should be fine. But yeah, worth keeping an eye on.
Not sure whether he's gotten insurance yet, though, because USAA keeps turning him down. On the Patriots side, it's basically a no thanks. I think Jacoby Myers is fine, especially after a 9 for 94 on 14 targets. But the 2 weeks before that, 6 for 44, 4 for 38. He's certainly not a lock for even PPR lineups, and everybody else's week 3 target counts were grossly inflated by 51 pass attempts.
Yes, I mean, I do expect New England to have to throw it a lot in this game, which, teams do against Tampa anyways because they're so good against the run. And James White being out might help Jacoby Myers too, just to get, a few more of those short-range targets. So he's not exciting, but I do think he's a pretty good volume bet at like the wide receiver 3 level this week. So in PPR leagues, I kind of like Myers.
Yeah, I can get on board with kind of like him. But especially beyond that, I mean, especially when Kendrick Bourne was the only other guy last week to crack 40 receiving yards on a 51 pass attempt day, just nothing else interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Jonnu Smith's like droppable to me. He's not playing well. His role has declined each week. Hunter Henry kind of looks like the clear lead tight end there. They're now in New England. And then we'll see about the backfield. I think you want to try to avoid it this week in this matchup. I mean, it's just a horrible spot for Damian Harris in this tough matchup, big underdogs. He's still not doing anything in the passing game. But we'll see who takes over the James White role. I think that's going to be important. It was Brandon Bolden stepping into that role last week. I don't think the Pats want that to be the case going forward, but there might have to be no one else they trust to do that stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, Brandon Bolden always just pops up as for like one time a year when he's on the team, except for that one year where they let him go to Miami. He's the one guy where they're like, oh crap, we need something this week. Brandon, please come play running back. Go catch some passes. We need a rushing touchdown from you this week. Can you cook the steaks? I mean, he's not a long-term answer for them for anything, but we'll see whether they actually believe in J.J. Taylor or Ramondre Stevenson to do any of that other fill-in stuff.
Yeah, Stevenson was a good pass catcher in college. You don't think of him that way because he's a big back, but it's interesting. J.J. Taylor was active last week, and they didn't use him in the passing game, so that kind of makes me think it's not going to be him.
For me, J.J. Taylor's the stash because if they don't believe in him catching passes, then why is he on the team? So I think when you have time to plan for it, he's the one with upside. Nobody that I'm excited about. I tried to stash him on my main event roster this week, though, and he was already rostered in my league. So, nobody that I would feel bad about missing out on, but he's the one guy that I find interesting. And before we get away from the wideouts completely, Andrew McGrady on YouTube wants to know Corey Davis or Jacoby Myers this week in PPR.
I mean, that's a tough one. I kind of like Myers, honestly. I just not that I trust either passing game, but I actually trust New England's more at home against a Bucs pass defense that's pretty beatable. Yeah,
I mean, it's really a coin flip for me because either one could get 15 targets or 6, and whoever happens to get the 15 targets is going to be the one. I don't think either one is going to do something amazing. I think it's just betting on who happens to get the target volume this week.
Yep, agreed.
In that backfield we started talking about, Damian Harris is kind of crumbling at this point. I mean, what should we do with Damian Harris? I think it's pretty easy to not play him this week against Tampa Bay, but I mean, it seems like maybe we should start to be a little bit concerned in general.
I don't know. I mean, I think he's still their clear lead runner. He's not going to do much in the passing game. He needs good game scripts, and he didn't get that last week. He's probably not going to get it this week. But going forward beyond this week, I still think he's like a fine RB3 or flex play at least.
Yeah, I can be on board with that. Anything else from this game?
Nope.
Closing it out with the Las Vegas Raiders at the LA Chargers on Monday night. The Chargers by 3 in this one, over under 52.5. I think the Chargers probably look tougher on defense right now than they really are after winning at Kansas City, limiting the Cowboys to 20 points before that. Both of those opponents topped 400 yards against the Chargers. The Chargers so far have allowed the 7th fewest points, but they sit right in the middle of the league in yardage allowed at 17th. So I'm not worried about anything in the Chargers defense for this matchup.
Nope, neither. I expect a lot of points on both sides in this game, so I like using guys from this game. I think Derek Carr, I don't know, is he still in does he still get a spot start designation, or is he just like an every week quarterback 1 at this point?
He's Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins.
I mean, he's finished quarterback 9, quarterback 8, and quarterback 11. So he's been a quarterback 1 every week so far. He has benefited from having 2 overtime games, which has, boosted the pass volume, but he's playing well. PFF has him 2nd in their passing grades, and the Raiders are still 5th in situation neutral pass rate. So it's been a pass leaning offense, which obviously helps Carr. So, we'll see going forward, but for this week, I definitely think he's a top 12 quarterback play.
Yeah. Leads the league in passing yards right now by 116 ahead of Tom Brady. So he's playing well. He's inside our top 12 this week. Henry Ruggs, suddenly 7 targets in 2 straight games. Is he Marquise Brown level?
This week they're close just because the matchup's so much better for Ruggs. Yeah, I mean, his 2 highest target totals of his career have come the last 2 weeks. The Raiders seem to be using him, in different ways versus, just running him deep last year. Ruggs was 35th in expected fantasy points 2 weeks ago, and he was 22nd last week. So, he's getting wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type usage. Again, I like this game, so I think Ruggs is definitely in play this week.
Hunter Renfrow might not match Ruggs on ceiling, but he probably has a higher floor. He's caught 5+ balls in each game so far this year. He's tied for 23rd among wideouts and catches, tied for 26th in receiving yards. He's basically Sterling Shepard light.
Yeah, he's a safe floor play in PPR. I mean, I still don't think there's a ton of upside, but he has 5+ catches in all 3 games this season. He has 4+ in 7 of his last 9 games dating back to last season. He even kind of got hot at the end of last season. So, Carr definitely trusts Renfrow. And again, there should be plenty of passes and points in this game.
Yeah, he's probably not going to win you the week, but the matchup could even improve if Chris Harris, the slot corner for the Chargers, is out again. And I mean, if this goes to a shutout, the upside on Hunter Renfrow is not that he catches a 50-yard touchdown, but that he gets 10 or 11 targets and catches 8 or 9 of them.
Cole Beasley game.
That's right. John Gruden is hopeful that Josh Jacobs gets back on grass this week. I didn't really get a chance to look further to see if that means there's a chance of Josh Jacobs playing or if they're just hoping that he's actually able to walk.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll get their first practice report later today for the Monday night game. Peyton Barber has just stepped into Josh Jacobs' role. Kenny Drake's role hasn't changed at all. And Drake's role is fine, by the way. Like, he's still getting enough passing game usage where he's been like a running back 3. Barber clearly the best target or the best carry bet in this backfield if Josh Jacobs is out again. And the Chargers' run defense has been really bad so far this season.
Yeah. You can use Peyton Barber this week. I'm glad to say I don't have to decide whether to use Peyton Barber this week, but he's certainly usable.
Yep.
On the Chargers side, it's all the usual guys who should be starting. And then Jared Cook has been quiet on production the past 2 weeks, but he's still run the 6th most routes among tight ends so far.
Yeah, 6th most routes, 10th most targets, 9th most air yards, and he's 8th in our expected fantasy points. So he's getting top 10 tight end usage in a good offense. So I think there's definitely some positive regression coming for Cook. I think he's a borderline top 12 play this week.
Yeah, he's easy to lose in a very nebulous range at tight end, but don't forget about him in making your decisions down there, I think.
Yep.
Anything else among the Chargers?
That'll do it.
That's going to do it for this Week 4 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to see our full Week 4 rankings to help you finalize all of your lineup decisions. Check the My Teams page. You can get customized lineup recommendations using our projections in your league settings. You can also find us anytime in the free DraftSharks Discord. You can find the link to join in the description for this podcast, wherever you're consuming it. For Jared Smola and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.